Good afternoon. Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to this program of Straight Talk. And let me say a word or two about Straight Talk. The older comrades would recall the title Straight Talk, which was a series of newspaper articles by Dr. Cheddi Jagan that was published in the Mirror newspaper. That was quite some time ago. But the Straight Talk concept is where we discuss issues in a very frank, free, and candid manner. And today, we are going to talk about the war in Ukraine. As all of us know, this is exactly 1 year since the war started. And I recall that we had a discussion right here at the Cheddi Jagan Research Center. We had a program in which we discussed the issue. And I remember I had two presentations. One was made by Comrade Donald, and I made a presentation in which we shared different perspectives on the war and how we felt it is going to evolve. And I recall too that the Russian ambassador was in the audience. And I recall him saying too that this was going to be a special military operation, which in his view was not going to take too long. It was supposed to be ending in a matter of a few weeks, according to the ambassador, and with minimal destruction to property and lives. But as we all know, it did not turn out to be exactly the way he had envisaged. And to discuss this matter in some more detail and to share perspectives based on what actually transpired over that 1 year period, we have two comrades who have written on this subject from time to time, and who I know has a very close and even passionate interest in what's going on. And the two comrades, one, the extreme right, is Mr. Clement Rohee, who needs no introduction himself. He is the president of the Guyana Peace Council, former general secretary of the People's Progressive Party, held several ministerial portfolios, foreign affairs, home affairs, and so on. And next to him, immediately next to me, is former President Ramotar, who himself has some views on the matter which he had articulated several times in letters to the press and on television programs. And so we are going to have a discussion. We are going to take a look at some developments and what in these two gentlemen view they see as the way forward in terms of how bringing this war to an end. So I will first start with Mr. Rohee, who will give us his initial thoughts on the subject, and then we'll move to Mr. Ramotar. Come on.
Thank you, Comrade Hydar. Good afternoon to our listeners. I want to start off from what was recently circulated and what was recently published on the international scene. And that has to do with the 12-point plan for a resolution, or for a possible resolution of the current war between Russia and Ukraine. If we start from that, we can walk back to why we are where we are today, in the sense that the 12-point plan submitted by the government of the People's Republic of China, it does not only point a way forward, it calls on the international community to take into consideration a number of measures which arose in the course or even prior to the beginning of the war, some in the course of the war. And those two precise issues are what I would consider to be important to focus on in order to understand why we are where we are today in relation to the present conflict between these two countries. Now, take, for example, reference is made in the 12-point proposal for a political settlement, because this matter, and that's an important point to be observed. The document calls for a political settlement to the conflict, meaning, as I understand the document to suggest, that this crisis cannot be resolved by military means. That's in the view of the Chinese government, that it has to be settled politically. In fact, the conflict arose as a result of political differences on a number of subjects, areas, between the government of Russia, the European Union, and the government of President Zelensky. It was a confluence of political differences on the way forward that eventually resulted in the war. As someone said, war is another means to achieve political ends. The document talks about the Cold War, bringing an end to Cold War mentality. That's important because if that mentality prevails, and in fact, again, we go back to the historical antecedents, which is a number of agreements were made to resolve the Ukraine issue. But those agreements were jettisoned precisely because of a Cold War mentality. So I would stop here at this point in time.
Yes, I'm happy that you did, because I was going to go in some more detail on the Chinese peace plan, if I may use that term to describe it. But I will now ask Commandant whether he would want to give his initial thoughts on how the war has evolved so far, and what are some of the
Well, over the year that the war has been going on, I think sometimes the main reason for the war gets lost, and people deal with the day-to-day and the suffering and the privation that the war has been causing. And therefore, I think we should once more to reflect on the beginning of this war, why it started, how it started. And the first thing to note is that this war has its origin in the collapse of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was collapsing, the Russians were promised that if they withdraw from Europe, that NATO will not move 1 inch towards its border. And Russia withdrew all its forces from Eastern Europe within its own borders. Russia has no troops in any European country, no bases in any European country anymore. And by the middle 1990s, the Americans began to think about breaking that promise that they made. And President Clinton was the first who initiated this talk about expanding NATO and bringing in all of those countries into NATO. So that was the first instance. Russia protested, then Yeltsin protested. And when when President Putin came to government, the power in Russia, he tried to solve it in another way. He proposed, therefore, okay, if you're taking all the countries into NATO, that Russia be also accepted into NATO. This was rejected. And when this proposal by President Putin was rejected, it also coincided with the unilateral breaking of the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty by the United States itself. Clearly, that would signal to any leader that you don't want me as a friend, you want me as an enemy. Your intention is not to keep me as a friend, but to destroy me and to destroy my country. And they continue to expand. And President Putin protested all along the line. In 2008, when they took a decision to accept Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, in Germany, President Putin made a very strong speech where he said that this was unacceptable to Russia. You're not accepting me into NATO, but you are expanding NATO to my borders, and you're threatening me with bases all around me. At the same time, a coup later on in Ukraine, after several waves of NATO expansion to Russian border, a coup was engineered in Ukraine that removed the government that was sympathetic to Russia and put in a government that was hostile to Russia in place. And they started to, the Russian people who were living in Ukraine rejected that change of government. And they said that they wanted their own state. Russia did not recognize them as a state at that time, because I make this point because the propaganda is so heavy that Russia wants to expand and wants more territory and what have you. That is totally not true. Russia did not accept them recognize them as state. In fact, Russia went further. Together with the United States, Germany, France, and Ukraine itself, to come to an agreement that is now called the Minsk Agreement, that was to allow the Russian parts of Ukraine to remain in Ukraine, but to be given some more autonomy. And that agreement was signed, and it was never kept. And instead, the Russian people living in eastern Ukraine were constantly bombed by the Ukrainian regime. And therefore, in my view, with all of that circumstances, it was very clear that NATO countries, NATO powers, the United States, being the head of that alliance, were using diplomacy as a smokescreen, as a tool, in order to create a de facto situation on Russia's border, and therefore Russia had to move when it did.
Well, thank you, Daniel, but I just want to ask you, 1 year into the war, looking back, would you say that those security concerns that Russia had has in any way been addressed by the intervention that the Russian made in terms of their invasion of Georgia? Why I ask is because Ukraine has now almost officially requested to be part of NATO.
They had before. I mean, this is another new thing. Yeah.
Now Sweden and Sweden and which other country?
Finland.
Finland. Sorry, these are now official members, if I may say so, of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and they share borders, I think, with Russia. Would you say that the security concern that Russia had has in any way been taken care of by virtue of what the actions they have taken to invade Ukraine?
What I'm saying is that if Russia did not take any action, Ukraine would have been a part of NATO and on Russia's border, and with bases on Russia's border. What you're arguing is part of a bigger plan that NATO had to force Russia into a war. They want to fight Russia now because they believe, many of them believe that they can beat Russia. If you look at the military budget of these countries, Russia's military budget compared to the rest of NATO is about 1/10 of the NATO budget. I think it has been a miscalculation on the part of the West that Russia would collapse because of the size of its military, the money the spending on its military is so less. It's about $60 billion compared to $800 billion of the United States alone. And when you add the rest of NATO countries, it's gone over $1 trillion. That this is what Russia is facing. And they expected with that combined with the fact that they were putting massive sanctions on Russia, that Russia would have collapsed. I think it was a miscalculation on their part that they would have destroyed Russia so quickly that they would have been able to take over Russia and destroy. There's an element of racism and hatred for the Russian people by a lot of these people for a long time to come. Why didn't they want to accept Russia into the? That would have created the best possible security situation for Europe if Russia was part of the NATO alliance, but they don't want that.
Well, you know.
So therefore, but the war, the struggle is not over. Russia was fighting one to prevent for the security of Russia, and now of those countries that have voted at a referendum, whether you say that it was recognized or not, it was free and fair, it was transparent. They voted to stay with Russia, a part of Russia, and Russia is now fighting to ensure that those places are safe and they are not within the range of the military might of NATO.
Well,
and that fight is still continuing. That hasn't concluded. So to answer your question that you asked, I would say that issue is what is being trying to be settled right now with the situation that exists.
well, we'll come back to have some more discussion on this, because there's a view also that Russia may have estimated the military capability of Ukraine and their ability to resist. And they would have felt that maybe this may not be something as difficult as it actually turned out.
That is quite possible. That is quite possible, because you will know that what has come out during this war, during this period, very recently, we heard Angela Merkel, Holland, and the former French president, former chancellor of Germany, and the former president of Ukraine, all saying that they had no intention of upholding the Minsk agreement that they signed, that agreement was to arm Ukraine even more to make them to fight Russia. And Stoltenberg, who's the head of NATO, publicly said that since 2014, they were preparing to fight Russia, meaning that they wanted to entrap Russia, to trap Russia into a war and to try to destroy Russia. This is the whole intention of the NATO alliance. And this is not no speculation. This is now coming from the horse's mouth, from people who were involved in these things, that they were preparing to destroy Russia. Well, and you know beforehand, they had all the economic sanctions well prepared. You remember President Biden saying that this would be the mother of all sanctions that they will put on Russia.
Well, you know, the war has turned out to be so disastrous, if I may say so, in terms of human lives that have been lost. Over nearly, if you total everything, is reaching nearly 500,000 people who would have perished in military losses as well as civilians. If you look at the scale of infrastructural damage, that is running into billions of dollars, not to mention the millions of people who were displaced, who had to leave their homes. And so I don't think since the Second World War, we have witnessed anything like what is taking place right now in terms of the damages that were done.
But you obviously weren't following the Vietnam War.
Well, no, I'm talking in recent history, man.
Well, Vietnam is still recent. How recent is recent for you?
Yeah, but the thing about it, and I asked Clement Rohee to come in here, because the issue now is to find a way out of the crisis that the world has found itself in. Not only these two countries, because if you look at the impact, it's global. Fuel prices have gone up. There's some stability now. The prices of grain has gone up. There's overall increase in the cost of living. because of the disruption in the supply chain due to sanctions and other problems. So this thing has affected almost everybody one way or the other, regardless of which part of the world you belong to. So this war is not localized. This is not a European theater only. This has transcended continents and boundaries. So the way out of all of this is to find a solution to the problem. And I am happy that there's been some discussions, some ideas floating around. The Chinese, for example, and I think Clement Rohee initially made some reference to it, that the Chinese have floated some ideas that have 12 points, I think. And we may want to look at it, how feasible that could be in terms of bringing out a solution. The good thing is, I read from the news, the BBC, that Zelensky himself has said that he thinks that this proposal, this Chinese proposal, could lay the basis for some kind of discussion on the way forward to end the war. So I don't know if you're familiar with what are some of the elements of the 12 point of the Chinese, but I can just read them for you because I think this is an important thing. The 12 point call, the first point is call for ceasefire and peace talks. The Chinese felt that it's time now for this war to come to an end. There should be a ceasefire. There should be talks. The Chinese statement urged the parties to avoid fanning the flames and aggravating tensions with the hope of preventing the crisis from deteriorating further or spilling out of control. The war and conflict, according to the Chinese statement, benefit no one. Everyone involved must stay rational and exercise restraint. Sovereignty of all countries to be respected. Abandon the Cold War mentality. I'm just looking at the elements of this thing and that you may want to comment on. Ceasing hostilities, resume peace talks, keep nuclear powers plants safe, facilitating grain exports, stopping and the non-use of nuclear weapons. All of these were some of the elements of the Chinese peace plan. And I would ask Clement Rohee, since he's already initiated some discussion along these lines, whether he may want to comment on his plan that the Chinese.
Before I come to that, Hydar, there's a matter that has always been tickling my interest on this, the genesis of this Ukraine-Russia war. At one time, there was a government in Ukraine led by one, I think, Viktor Yanukovych, that was sympathetic to the Putin administration. But he was seen as an ally of Putin. And I'm wondering why, when the situation was so favorable to Russia, notwithstanding the external issue that was playing out that Donald mentioned at the time in the European theater, why didn't Russia move at a time when internally in Ukraine, the situation is more favorable to them? By virtue of the fact that, like he has in Belarus, he has an ally there, in the same way at the time, he had an ally in the Ukraine, which would have provided, the, for want of a better word, opportunity for him to do, not necessarily by means of a war, but like he did, for example, with the piece of land that he annexed.
Crimea or the
Crimea. In the same way, he could have accomplished by other means the objective which he's seeking now in the Donbass. Okay, that is a matter that has always taken my interest. Could we describe that as a missed opportunity? A question, a rhetorical question. But in examining the matter deeper, talking about the same conundrum, so to speak. You had certain dynamics that were playing out in Europe, which it would seem that Putin was hoping would eventually play out in his favor. Now, it is true that Putin administration, prior to the Putin administration, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, had made a number of initiatives, had taken a number of initiatives to sort of not only ease the tension, but in fulfillment of this position that Russia had, that Russia was part of Europe, was an integral part of Europe. They would say Russia was part of the European home, right? And apart from that, they had proposed what is called a common European strategy. So here you had a situation where Russia, as a country, irrespective of who was in the president at the time, was taking certain initiatives externally, while internally in the Ukraine and Russia, there were strong possibilities for action to be taken to accomplish outside of a war what Russia is seeking to do by means of a war now. So I'm just putting that as a question for us to think about. I can't answer that, but it would seem to me, and this might conflict with what Donald is suggesting, that one, as I said, could have been a missed opportunity on the Russian part, or a miscalculation on the Russian part, in that they were hoping that certain dynamics would play out in their favor, but it didn't. Because as he said, the Western leaders had a different agenda. And he mentioned certain names at the time.
Yeah.
Now, to come to the issue, presently, I'm saying that there seems to be a stalemate in the current situation as it stands right now. My understanding, I'm not asking anyone to agree with me, my understanding is that neither side seem to be winning as we understand in the war. It is true that Russia has taken control of a significant portion of that region that borders with Russian territory, in Donbass. That is a given fact. And even the Western media accepts that when they show the maps of Ukrainian occupied territory and Russian occupied territory at this point in time. So where do we go from here? You pose that question. The Chinese have put a 12-point plan on the table. I think it was a necessary move. It was a timely move, having regard to the fact that nothing seemed to be moving in either direction. In other words, no other nation has put on the table a plan of this nature, comprehensive, or a comprehensive settlement of the conflict between the two countries. Now, it would seem to me that the plan is there for consideration. The proposal is there, what they call, for a political settlement, it's there for consideration, right? It raises all the issues that you refer to. It's consistent with what the United Nations is calling for. It's consistent with what other forces, and I use the word other negatively, other political forces in the world is calling for. But we are not hearing that from those who are waging the war against Russia through Ukraine as either proxy or by some other means. So the Chinese obviously put this on the table because they want to trigger a discussion on the matter. They want a discussion on the matter at a global level, and that's why it's all over the world now. I would not I have no doubts. Well, I shouldn't say I have no doubt, but I would find it difficult to accept that serious governments in the world, especially in Europe and North America, and in the Ukraine itself, and you made the point that the president of Ukraine himself came up with a statement saying that what the Chinese have put forward is a step in the right direction, and he's looking forward to more action in this respect. That tells me that that seems to be a sign of him wanting an end to the war. But when we see more and more weapons imported into the country, and you juxtapose that against his statement, you're wondering what is all this about? Because on the one hand, you're hearing support for the Chinese plan in Ukraine, coming out of Ukraine, but on the other, you're seeing more and more weapons being poured into the Ukraine.
Well, you
So
know,
the question is,
Clement, there's a saying,
is there a game that is played out there?
if you wish for peace, you have to prepare for war. And maybe that is the kind of a thing.
Well, I think they've gone past the question of preparing for the war. The war is already being waged. So I'm saying to conclude on this point, the Chinese have put a proposal on the table, a 12-point plan on the table for discussion, right? Let's see what is going to come out of it, who will respond. Because if you don't want to even discuss the plan, it means that you have an interest in continuing the war.
Well, there's an interesting perspective you afforded here, but I'm
No,
let you come in now with
I
your
think
take.
the plan is welcome, that you're talking about. Any plan that can end the war, it would be welcome. And that can bring some kind of respite to what is taking place. All of that is important. But let's not also forget that there are other proposals too. Proposals came from the Pope to use the Vatican, it offered the Vatican to be a place where Russia and Ukraine can come and talk. That has not been taken up, but we hope that that is also another.
That's interesting. I don't think much is known of that plan.
And there's also Lula, after he came to government as president in Brazil, Lula also expressed very strong views, and he was talking about forming a group of countries like another line, similar to the another line type of thing, to be part of, to try to get peace in Russia. So I think that, but the Chinese, of course, by far the most outlined some more concrete measures that should be taken. And I hope that they will succeed. And it is encouraging to see the position that Zelensky has taken. But don't forget, I mean, while I'm welcoming this and happy about it, I must also look back at what had happened before. In March of 2022, Russia and Ukraine had worked out an agreement to end the war, that Russia would withdraw from Ukraine, and Ukraine will accept to be a neutral country and not go into NATO. That was brokered by Erdogan from Turkey. And then just to sign it now, Ukraine backed away from that position, most likely after the visit of Johnson to Kyiv, and it most likely the Americans and the British sabotaged that agreement that was already there. One thing I don't agree with what the Chinese mentioned, that nobody is benefiting from the war. A lot of people are benefiting from this war. The military-industrial complex, they're making billions of dollars in new weapons that they are taking. They are manufacturing and selling and going to Ukraine. And by the way, Ukraine will have to pay for these things. These things are not being given to Ukraine free. This is something that Ukraine will have to pay for. So after this war, Ukraine can very well find itself as a colony of the Western powers because of the kind of debt that they will have to pay. So that's another issue that we have to grapple with. But let us also be very clear that this is not just a war with Russia and Ukraine. This is a proxy war of NATO that has pushed and tried to get Russia into a position to try to defeat Russia. They had to do it now because they don't want to give Russia time to strengthen itself more and more. And this is this is not a Ukraine war. Zelensky is not the main person in this war. Zelensky is being demonstrated to be taking instructions from Washington and London in some ways as far as this war is concerned. The biggest sufferers of this war are the Europeans. Germany is being deindustrialized now. What the Americans, this man, Seymour Hersh, made a very compelling case that the United States destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. And by the way, just as a side, the Americans have been talking a lot about climate change and protecting the environment. And nobody is saying that they blew up 3 pipelines 700 miles long filled with gas that is most responsible to creating the greenhouse effect on the earth. This was one of the biggest environmental disasters, but a lot of people who pay lip service to climate change, they have not been saying anything. This is the criminal, this is a state terrorist, this is state terrorism in its purest form that we have seen in what has taken place there. So while I welcome the Chinese goodwill effort to try to bring this war to an end, I think there's still a lot of people who got a lot of things to benefit from this war, and the main objective is to destroy Russia. How come no one is saying that fighting a war against Russia, that stopping Russian sportsmen from taking part in sports in any part of the world, Olympics committee, the tennis places, all of that, stopping Russia, the World Cup with football, Russian teams were not there. Russian literature is being obliterated in Europe. It's being destroyed. You cannot quote Putin. Some of the major Tchaikovsky music, dances, Russian troops are being discriminated against. It's not only fighting the Russian government, they are fighting the Russian people and trying to destroy Russian culture with people like Pushkin and the contribution that Russian literature and art has contributed to the world. But nobody is saying anything. It shows you that, as I have said once before and wrote once before, that Europe has just become a colony of the United States now. They're taking orders from the United States. They have, and right now, while they have done this to Europe, they are creating favorable economic policies to attract European industries to go to the United States.
Well,
in using economic terms, the advantage that Germany had in developing because of cheap Russian oil and gas has been destroyed.
well, we have been hearing 2 different narratives. One coming from the United States President, Joe Biden, who in a very surprise move went actually into Kyiv a few days ago. And he made some very, very strong statements in support of Ukraine. And he went over to Poland and he said that this war, that the West, NATO and the United States is prepared to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And that winning this war will not be something that the West, that Russia can counter, because in his view, this is going to be a war that will ultimately have to result in a Ukrainian victory.
It is very interesting to note that the United States has not made one proposal for peace. Nothing for peace. None of the NATO countries have made one single proposal for peace. The proposals for peace are coming from China, Brazil, the Pope, and Turkey, and other places like that. That is where the proposals are coming from, not from the United States, not from the NATO countries.
But while the proposals coming from those countries are important and of course significant, The proposal coming from China, I think, is of greater significance and
Yes.
importance because of the
Sure.
stature of China, and but also because they're a member of the United Nations Security Council.
Yes.
But my question is, when I examine the situation of totality, which country, the question is, which country can play a role? And to qualify that even further, a decisive role in seeking a resolution to this war that is going on. It cannot be a third world country. It cannot be another NATO member country, because there are issues there where there are a lot of conflicts. For example, Turkey doesn't want the inclusion of Sweden and Denmark within
Yes, because
NATO. So it would seem to me, and the United States is not going to listen to another NATO country. I'm not going to accept the role of another NATO country, given the power, military, and economic strength of America. They're going to listen to who they consider to be their equals. Remember, the United States has issued a national security document where they consider China to be the greatest security threat to America. So if that, assuming that is indeed the case, then it is only China that America, and this brings us to another point which we haven't touched on as yet, which is that China is being targeted consistently by a number of countries and by propaganda means that it's supporting Russia. But there's no evidence of that effect. And there seems to be a crusade against China on the false premise, one, that it is an ally of China, and they're looking at the recent meeting between Putin and the head of the Foreign Commission, the Commission on Foreign Affairs from China, who visited Moscow. And then they're also doing that, claiming that China is preparing to send arms to Russia.
Lethal arms.
Lethal weapons.
Lethal weapons.
When there's nothing to that effect. So the strategy behind that seems to me that do whatever we can to prevent China from getting involved. Shooting down the balloons, all of this probably is part of the plan to put pressure on China not to be involved in this. Because you see, even theoretically speaking, if China were to get involved, the whole balance of forces would change even more dramatically. I mean, it has changed already, but it would change even more dramatically. So the whole idea in the strategy is to pressure China to keep out of the conflict by doing all these different things which I referred to.
Would you say, though, and I may put this to you, whether you think there may be some fatigue, war fatigue, if you like, stepping in both camps, where there's a drain of resources, billions of dollars are being spent on this war. Russia, it must have an impact on Russian economy. And I think Putin in his recent address said that I think the economy shrunk by 2% or something like that. Of course, there is also the problem in some European countries where people are already asking questions, even in the United States, as to for how long can they sustain this, the assistance that they're giving to Ukraine and Russia. So there's a problem, a fatigue on both camps. And whether this may perhaps trigger the kind of response that is coming from China. I don't know. I would like to have your thoughts on this.
No, I think China needs peace. China has always been a country propagating peace. China has had its biggest economic leap forward at the time when there was peace. China desires peace, and China desires good relations with the rest of the world. The Americans constantly manufacture enemies. They're constantly manufacturing enemies, and they're trying to make China the enemy now. The Americans are very much afraid for any country to overtake them as the economic power in the world. China has no ambition to be hegemonic. Even if China becomes the #1 country in the world today, China doesn't have any policy that they want to have a hegemonic control of the world already. There's no sign of that. And but the Americans are afraid of what we were calling a zombie. They're afraid that if China becomes the #1 power in the world, that China will be dictating policies to them, but there is no evidence of that. They were working with China all along. They cooperated with China. They benefited. Their economy benefited. Their consumer benefited from having an economic relationship with China. Their hostility to China really began in earnest up when the 2008 financial crisis started, and when China became the biggest trading partner of the world and China's economy became the greatest motor driving the international economy. That is from then, if you look at American propaganda, it was them they started to attack China. China had done nothing to earn the wrath of the United States. There is no policy, nothing that China has not provoked the Americans in any way. China is the one that has been provoked all the time and being called all kinds of names without making, they have done nothing to earn that type of reputation. So the Americans just don't want to have the most powerful country in the world since 1945. They don't want to have any competition. Part of the problem with Russia is to destroy Russia because Russia has the ability to stand up to them militarily. Russia has nuclear weapons. Russia has probably more advanced weapons than the Americans in this regard at this point in time. For the first time in history, that Russia probably got more advanced weapons than the United States. And the growth of China, they're now trying to stop that, to prevent that, and by putting all of these sanctions on Chinese company. What is wrong with TikTok? Everybody loves TikTok. Why do you ban TikTok? One of the best telephones in the world is Chinese Huawei, all over the place. And no, they're giving us absolutely no evidence, just repeating slogans over and over again to attack China. So I would say that China has been the target, is the next target of the United States that they're using because they need enemies in order to fuel their military-industrial complex.
Hydar, I want to come back to the Chinese thing.
Go on.
There are two areas that have attracted my attention. Not that the others haven't, but these two areas I believe are crucial to the success of implementing this proposal. One is the question of ceasing hostilities or the cessation of hostilities. And this is what it says, it's very brief. Conflict and war benefit no one. Well, say that. All parties must stay rational and exercise restraint, avoid fanning the flames and aggravating tension that's going on, and prevent the crisis from deteriorating further or even spiraling out of control. That's a strong possibility.
Yeah.
Then it says that all parties should support Russia and Ukraine. Support Russia and Ukraine in working in the same direction and returning and resuming direct dialogue as quickly as possible. That's because they recognize that the thing has been out of control.
Exactly.
And then it goes on to say, so as to gradually de-escalate the situation and ultimately reach a comprehensive ceasefire. Not the end of the war they're talking about, they talk about a comprehensive ceasefire on both sides. Then the next one that attracted my attention is resuming peace talks. And this is what it says. Dialogue and negotiations are the only viable solution to the Ukraine crisis. All efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement of the crisis must be encouraged and supported. Who would be against this? And then it goes on, the international community should stay committed to the right approach of promoting talks for peace, help parties to the conflict open the door to a political settlement, not a settlement by means of war. War never settled things like this. Remember Vietnam? It was a political settlement. In Afghanistan, it was a political settlement. Although the Vietnamese were surely winning the war, or had won the war, and Afghanistan, the Taliban, was already almost at the doors of power. Then it goes on. Political settlement as soon as possible and create conditions and platforms for the resumption of negotiations. China will continue to play a constructive role in this regard.
Well, that is a very important.
What more can you want at this point in
That's
time?
very, very significant, I would say, coming from the Chinese, because as you said, you're a war power and their war certainly has got some weight. And reading from the BBC program, as I said earlier in the program, Zelensky seemed inclined to at least to go along with some of the recommendations that.
I believe Zelensky, I don't have the evidence, but I try to follow as best as I could from where we are here in Guyana, reading all the reports. And by the way, sometimes you got to read a lot of reports in order to understand what's going on, because you can't read one side only. Yeah, that's what's being fed to us. We as political scientists, at least we profess to be, have to read as widely as we can, right? So I suspect, let's use that word, I suspect that Zelensky wants an end to this war. It might be possible that internally, it might be possible, and this might be just speculative, that war generates a lot of internal contradictions.
Oh, yes, certainly.
Right?
Yes.
Europe also wants an end to the war.
Well, Clement, that's a good point you're making here.
Yeah.
But you have to consider too that the weight of international opinion is not in favor of war, if I may say so. Look at the most recent UN vote. Of the countries that make up the UN General Assembly, 141 of the countries called on Russia to withdraw and for there to be a peaceful solution to the problem. Of course, there were a few abstention and just about 7
People
countries.
didn't turn up to vote.
Now, that is also speaking to the way world global opinion is about the war.
Yeah.
And I think all of this must be impacting on the need for some kind of a solution. And the Chinese, no doubt, has taken the initiative to come up with that. And I'm happy that you have got a copy of the statement in front of you. Yeah. Because these are very, 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 very what should I say? Forward-looking and weighty issues.
Yeah.
They're all over to you.
But let me just say that that some of the experience we've had, we make reference to Vietnam and so forth. A lot of what happened in Vietnam, they are taking steps to prevent, to ensure that it don't happen again. Vietnam was not only victorious because of what Vietnam did, but because of the massive demonstration throughout the world against the war in Vietnam.
Right.
In the United States itself, President Nixon was forced to take this into consideration. And he went to the bargaining table because of the unpopularity of the war in the United States itself. Since then, the neocons in the United States have learned, and the media have become massive. Look at the mainstream media. They haven't cared nothing about what is taking place, about Hirsch's investigative finding. This was the same man who exposed the My Lai massacre. This was the same man who exposed the Abu Ghraib problems and so forth. This is a man of high integrity. This is a man of substance as an investigative journalist. Nothing, they have blanked out every single opposing opinion. Every single opposing opinion have been blanked out because of that. And the voting that you're talking about that you've seen in the United Nations just shows you of the coercive powers that the United States possess. Many of these countries have been talking against what the United States are doing. Let's take, for instance, South Africa, being coming out boldly and strongly against what opposing what the United States is, but they abstained. They didn't vote with Russia, they abstained. Why? Because they still have their economy tied there. They're still worried. They know what the Americans are capable of. They know that they overthrow governments. Look at the Caribbean government. The Caribbean government know that this thing is going right down to it can end up in nuclear war. All of them voted for against Russia in this. All of them voted against Russia.
Yeah, but
totally ignoring the fact that if there was a war, all of us would be instead of making an effort to do something, even if they abstain, to try to force the Americans to recognize that this is a problem that we need to talk about.
But I was making the point to earlier in my earlier presentation that the CARICOM has taken a position on this matter, and so is the Guyana government, that you have to go by the rules, the international rules, your territorial integrity, violation of the Geneva, the UN Charter, all of these things. Are you saying that it's okay? And I just want to hear you on this because that it's okay for a country to just move over and cross another country, take over land and territory. Is that okay?
Are you saying that it's okay for Israel to be doing what they're doing?
No, it's not okay. Certainly.
And so why aren't the CARICOM leaders saying anything about that? Why aren't the world leaders at the United Nations who voted for? I'm not saying it justify the other, but what I'm saying that you are totally taking this thing out of context of its whole historical context. I tried at the beginning to show you what Russia did to try to avoid the war. And I'm showing you that Russia had no option, no other option. And the point I want to make is what Russia was saying, that Ukraine and Russia's security are connected. Ukraine cannot have any security without Russian security being secured. And Russia cannot have any security without Ukraine being
you have made this point.
And Russia has made that point too, to saying that why can't the NATO give assurance that Ukraine will not be a NATO power? They refuse to have Russia into NATO. Why can't they tell Ukraine that you cannot come into NATO?
Clement, I don't know if you have a view on this.
No, let me.
You want to?
It's an interesting discussion at this point in time. I want to say this, that notwithstanding the vote in the United Nations General Assembly, where the overwhelming majority of members have voted for withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine, we've gone beyond that. The Chinese proposals have gone beyond that. It's not only a question of withdrawing from Ukraine, no. It's a question of a peace plan for Ukraine. And so while talk about withdrawal, that's a military option. That's a military option. That doesn't solve anything politically. What has to be done now is, and I would respectfully say this without any, umbrage to the Chinese diplomacy or whatever. This matter now has to go before the Security Council. This plan has to go now before the United Nations Security Council. All governments must say where they stand in relation to this proposal.
And the Security Council or the General Assembly?
First of all, go to the
because the Security Council, because of its composition,
so
they will not take.
Whoever wants to veto it, let them veto it, then we will know where they stand. Right? Because almost all the countries, all the permanent members, the 5 Ps, have veto powers. There are some non-permanent members who don't have a vote,
Mm.
so to speak.
Yeah, they don't have a vote, but
Right, but they're there.
they're there.
So what I'm saying is this, that this matter now, this proposal or this plan must go before the United Nations Security Council for them to pronounce on its doability, how doable, what are the ways and means to which this plan should be pursued. I am positive that if this goes before the United Nations General Assembly now, DGA,
Mm.
that it will be overwhelmingly supported by member states of the United Nations. So we've gone, this is where diplomacy now steps in. We've been talking about the need for intense diplomatic action. They're represented in the United Nations are political parties who are in government. That's a political forum, political/diplomatic forum.
Okay.
So that this plan, because you asked, I think the question was where or how far we will get with this.
Mm.
You know, remember Cheddi Jagan had this thing about the new global human order.
Mm. Yeah.
But he didn't, and incidentally, the CARICOM must also consider this document and say where they stand on it, with due respect to all the governments, including ours. It's a document that is worthy of consideration, not immediate approval, but at least consideration and discussion.
Okay.
That is important in terms of move. So the more the world governments support what is in this 12-point proposal, the more we get in closer to a resolution of the situation between Iran, between Ukraine and.
Thank you, Clement, but we are approaching program time, but there's one issue I want to get with both of your opinion on, and that is the potential for a nuclear conflagration. And I noticed Russia has opted out of the nuclear
They have
talks.
opted out. They have suspended.
Oh, they have suspended. Sorry, they have suspended.
Suspended, yeah.
How? What do you make of that?
Well, in the plan, at number 7, states elusively, nuclear power plants must be kept safe. China opposes armed attacks against nuclear power plants, and that's one
Yes.
aspect of
Yes.
nuclear.
So the Chinese position is clear that they are not.
But then it goes on to say, number 8, reducing strategic risk. Nuclear weapons must not be used and nuclear wars must not be fought. The threat or use of nuclear weapons should be opposed. Nuclear proliferation must be prevented and nuclear crisis avoided. China opposes the research, development, and use of nuclear and biological weapons by any country under any circumstance. I don't know if that's referring to Iran.
Mhm. But
Iran.
I was trying to situate that within with the latest position that Russia has taken to is that suspend its participation?
Well, Russia has suspended its participation. I don't see how they could have done otherwise. The Americans will want to come to inspect Russia's military installation, while at the same time they are making an announcement that Russia must be defeated in Ukraine. While at the same time they are pouring in more and more weapons into Ukraine. This is not a period of time when you are a normal situation. You are fighting against a country. You have declared war against Russia. You want to liquidate Russia, not only the Russian army, but you want to liquidate the Russian people, the Russian language, the Russian literature, the Russian arts, the Russian sports people. They can't have anything. And now you are making a proposal that I want to, you withdraw. America withdraw. All Russia is now saying that I have 3 nuclear powers against me. I have Russia, I have the United States, I have the United Kingdom, I have France against me. Let us take all of that into consideration and let us inspect everybody's story, because I don't know what France and UK is doing. Well, in these cases, and the Americans can very well be arming them much more and more. So Russia has taken, to my mind, a common sense position that anybody would take.
Well, let us just hope that it doesn't reach that stage and that the war is going to come to an end and that the Chinese proposal is going to be taken seriously.
That is the biggest danger, Hydar. That is the most dangerous situation we are. We have never been in this, even with the Cuban Missile Crisis. At least we had sensible leaders in the world. Kennedy and Khrushchev knew when to walk back from the precipice. These people that we have here are calling for more and more war. And you can't put Russia sees this as an existential threat to their very existence. You listen to Putin's speech. So if Russia is placed in a corner, what do we expect them to do? What do we expect them to do? To lose?
That question you raised about
That is the danger.
that triggered a thing between discussion, kind of heated between you and Donald about whether you should walk into another country. I think we have to take into consideration our own situation here in Guyana. We have a border dispute with Suriname, and we have a controversy with Venezuela, right? So Guyana, as a country, and any government that sits in power in this country of ours has to take cognizance of the fact of this reality. And therefore, when it comes to the question of territorial integrity and national sovereignty, we hold very firmly to these issues. And I think Donald and Clement Rohee, one of them wrote a book about the Middle East, which touches on this question. We've also had discussions on this, for example, in relation to when Turkey invaded Cyprus, and also in relation to the Malvinas and Argentina, or the Falkland Islands and the UK, as they call it. So we have to always be sensitive and attentive to questions of territorial integrity and national sovereignty in conformity with United Nations charters, because we would never want to have a situation where troops are amassed on our borders. And then we have to call on some big brother, because we don't have a military to deal with any of those two. Well, maybe Suriname, yes, but I don't want to talk too much on that. All I'm saying is that if we have to be sensitive and we have to be quite diplomatically correct in addressing the question of, within the United Nations Charter, of the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of especially our country, Guyana.
But I don't think the comparison is the fair one. I don't think it is a fair one. We're talking about putting nuclear weapons on a country's border. We're talking about reducing the flight time of a rocket from 20 minutes from United States to Russia, or from Germany, 10 minutes to a minute to hit Moscow from the border of Ukraine. That is what we're talking about. We're not having Venezuelans or Guyanese are not being killed in Venezuela or in Suriname, and Surinamese and Venezuelans are not being killed in
going to provoke another discussion.
So to make that kind of comparison is
I'm not making a comparison.
You can't
I'm
do
not
that.
making a comparison.
I guess we can go on. This is a very
principle.
this is a very interesting and very profound discussion too, because what is taking place there is impacting on the entire world.
By the way, Britain has a moral responsibility to us. They are the ones who signed their agreement with Venezuela. And the Americans also have a moral responsibility. It's their people who were in the commission in the 1898 that signed their
They're supporting us at the Hague.
Yeah, fine, it's great. I'm happy. But what I'm saying is you were saying that, well, we mustn't say anything because we got these problems.
I'm not saying, never said we must say anything.
Implicit in what you're saying.
I never said we must say anything. I'm saying we must be sensitive.
He's only, you are dealing it from a position of principle, and I understand.
I'm dealing from principle. Am I on principle?
No.
On principle.
And that's, but there are some international norms and principles that guide interstate behavior, how states relate to other states. But one of it that you can't just violate it. But we are going back in circles here, and I don't want
you cannot look at these things an unhistoric way. If diplomacy was being used as a smokescreen to create a de facto situation in Russia, what do you expect a head of state to do?
Thank you, Comrade Daniel. Thank you, Comrade Rohee. Thank you, viewers. I think we have a very lively and frank, straight talk, as the program is saying. And let me say that the good thing about this program is that people are free to give their own views, their own opinions, their own perspectives. And the Jagan Research Center, which is hosting this program, I want to state that the views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the views of the host of this program, which is the Cheddi Jagan Research Center. Useful as the perspectives are, but I want to thank our panelists and of course our viewers. And I want to encourage all of you to look out for the Straight Talk program, because this is how this program is going to go. We are going to have an interaction of ideas, of perspectives, and so that you, the viewers out there, can see things in a way that you would not normally see it. So thank you, gentlemen, and it's a pleasure having you.